So if you're not familiar with Sensei Format, then you may be wondering, hey, why does your Blender look like that? And that is because I'm using the Sensei Format add-on, which I basically built to overhaul Blender's user interface. Basically stuff to just try to make Blender a bit more straightforward and easier to use. And in my opinion, it just makes the whole experience a lot funner and quicker. So if you're interested in that, it's totally free. You can check out Sensei Format by clicking the link to the left over there. However, it's not necessary to use Sensei Format to follow along with the tutorial videos about the Alchemy material library add-on, which you can totally use regular default Blender or Sensei Format to use the Alchemy add-on. But I will be using Sensei Format to demonstrate Alchemy's features because it just makes life a whole lot easier for me. All right, that's enough about that. I'm going to go ahead and close this stuff up and load a new file. So I'm not sure if you've noticed this, but Blender sort of has a lot of menus and options and settings and buttons and things like that. I'm just kidding, of course you noticed that. So my first objective when I began designing Alchemy was to stay as far away as possible from adding more clutter to Blender. And so that's why the Alchemy add-on was designed to be integrated directly into Blender's existing Material tab here in the Properties panel. In fact, the only difference that you'll notice between having Alchemy installed in Blender and Alchemy not installed in Blender to begin with are these two harmless little buttons up here. So if we were to switch this to User Preferences and under Add-ons and Sensei Format, if I were to disable the Alchemy Material library here, this is what Blender's Material tab looks like without Alchemy installed. That is, of course, if there's no material on the object. If we were to add a material, it looks like this, of course. And this is what it looks like with it installed. So with it installed, we just have two simple extra buttons up here. And if you have a material on the object, you'll also notice these two buttons down here, which this button will let us add the active material to the library if we want. And this button lets us adjust various settings for our materials. I'm going to go ahead and switch this back to the 3D view, and I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that material that we just added. With the buttons up top here, we've got this first button to the left, which will display options. It also lets us select our active material library, which the Alchemy add-on comes with the Alchemy base pack. It is full of 75 cycles materials, which also includes special Alchemy particle materials and Alchemy effect materials, which we'll get into in a little bit. And you can get this open source pack for free on the Alchemy documentation page, which you can get to by clicking a link to the left over there. So right now I've only got 2 libraries to select from, but you could have hundreds of libraries in here if you wanted. And then up top here we have system options. This lets us do things like create a new library, rename the active library, copy libraries, siphon materials, which we'll get into what this means in a future video. But basically this lets you suck up all the materials in a file into a library if you want. It also lets you create material libraries from folders of hundreds of blend files, which is super awesome. And then we have the Manage tab, which lets us do things like update the add-on, reset things, back up our libraries, change assets path, merge libraries, and a bunch of useful kind of system-y stuff like that. And then we have options here to change various settings in Alchemy, and we'll get into all this stuff in the future. But if we click that, it'll close all that up so we don't have to deal with it when we're not, using it. Then we have the actual library button itself. And since we are using the Alchemy base pack right now, which if we go ahead and click on the library here, will tell us information about it. So for instance, there's 75 total materials, 0 Blender render materials, and 75 cycles materials. Since there are no Blender render materials in this library, if you are in Blender render mode, you're going to get this little message here telling you, hey, there's no materials found in the library, but you can press this button to add a material if you wanted to. That's one of the cool things about Alchemy is that it will automatically separate Blender render and cycles materials so that you will only see Blender render materials when in Blender render mode and only see cycles materials when in cycles rendering mode. There's no special, name or anything that you have to do to the material. It just understands what a Blender render material is and knows how to automatically separate those for you. So if I were to go ahead and switch this to cycles render, we'll now see the actual library display, and I can close up the options button here. First thing you'll notice here is some of these materials have these little sparkly bits on them, and the sparkly bits mean that that is a particle material. Now, unfortunately, we can't see the actual particles manifest in the material preview display. However, you can immediately know it's a particle material because you'll always see the little particle sign there. You'll also see some materials with names like Raise AE or Fire AE or Fog AE, and the AE means that that is an Alchemy effect material, and we'll get into that in the future as well. So to get started on this scene here, I'm going to press Shift A, under Mesh, add a plane, press S to scale that out a bit. It's just going to be kind of our simple little ground here. And I'm going to go ahead and press X to get rid of that cube, press Tab to go into edit mode, and tap W 2 or 3 times to subdivide this plane. If you're using Sensei Format, if you're in Blender default, then you'll want to press W and then press subdivide, I guess. Press Tab to go back into object mode, and I'm going to press W a few more times in object mode, which in Sensei Format adds smooth shading as well as a subsurface modifier, and then tapping it more will increase the levels of the added subsurface modifier. So I'm going to go ahead and increase that to about 3 will be good there. Then I'm going to press Tab to go back into edit mode, and I'm just going to select a few of these points because I want to make kind of a little hilly kind of ground area. And so to do that, I'm going to turn on proportional editing, and press G to grab, middle mouse to constrain. Then I'm going to scroll my middle mouse up to increase the size of the proportional editing there. And something like that. Okay, press Tab to go back into object mode, and then I'm going to apply this subsurface modifier. All right, back on the material tab, let's go ahead and give a dirt material from our Alchemy base pack to this plane. So to do that, we can either scroll down and find it that way, or we can also search for things alphabetically by clicking this and then typing whatever we're looking for in. So if we start typing dirt, it'll show up there, which is one way to do it. In addition to being able to search for things, Alchemy has a really powerful material category system called reality palettes. So to access that, we click this button here, and you'll see as soon as we do, we then have access to all of these categories. So right now we're on all, but if I were to click on, say, the earth materials, we'll see all those show up, or I could click metal and we'll see the different metal materials, organic, and what have you. You can display multiple categories by holding Shift and selecting a category. So say I knew I wanted to build a scene that was going to use like dirt and sand and maybe grass, so I could Shift select the grass category, and that will show all the materials which belong to grass. And say I knew I was going to have some concrete or asphalt or something in there too, so I could Shift select the pavement section, and I've now created a palette of materials which to create my scene with. And so that's sort of why it's called reality palettes, because it lets you quickly build a palette to design whatever you're wanting to design. And so to close that out, we could just click that, and then we have our narrowed in selection of materials that we want to work with. And this helps us really speed up our workflow. So while we're at it, if I click back on the reality palettes button here, each material can belong to as many categories as you want. So for instance, you see this cracked earth one, it belongs to the category of earth as well as particle. Or if I were to click on this limestone material, it belongs to rock and earth. So for instance, if I were to click on the rock category, which is pretty slim, then we see it there. Or if I click on the earth one, it's also in there. So you can edit these categories. You can create new categories if you want. All you have to do is add a comma and type in which category you want the material to be included in, or just create a new one. So for instance, for this cracked earth one, I could create a new category called, I don't know, I can't think of anything good, mountains, or whatever. So if we click off here and come back, there is now a mountains category, and if we click it, it will show up there. And if you want to change that, you can just click back on it and get rid of it. So It's a really powerful, awesome system that makes using the materials in your active library a lot easier and faster. So I'm going to click all, which returns the view of all the materials in the active library there. And I'm going to go ahead and close that up because I don't need it right now. And let's go ahead and add this dirt material to this little ground we made. So to add a material to one or multiple objects, you just select the material you want and press use. And thanks to Blender 2.78's awesome new material viewport shading for cycles, we can actually immediately see a representation of the procedural material live in the 3D view. So if I were to switch this from solid viewport shading to material, as is the little camera area down here in Sensei Format, we can also see this in the big 3D view here. So obviously this isn't as good as it's going to look when it renders. It's just a simple live 3D view update, but it does give us a lot of useful information. So looking at this application of this material on this object, immediately I see some stuff I might want to adjust about it. So to do that, I can click on this adjust button. And this adjust button just gives you quick access to a lot of commonly needed things to change for materials, as well as Alchemy particle materials and Alchemy effect materials. So as soon as we press that, we'll get access to what's called the texture space options in Blender, but you can pretty much think of it as the material surface on the object. So we can adjust the whole thing. We can scale it up or scale it down by clicking the button to this far right here, and we can actually adjust this for multiple objects at the same time, or we can adjust individual scale values X, Y, and Z like this. And one thing going on I can see is a little bit of stretching here with this procedural dirt that I want to get rid of, and that seems to have done the trick. Now, I'm not super worried about it because we're going to cover it up with grass and a bunch of other stuff, but it's nice to know that it looks good underneath. So I'm going to go ahead and press hide here to hide the texture space visualization in the 3D view and also hide all those options because I don't like a bunch of clutter. So when it comes to particle materials in Alchemy, there's basically two ways you can use them. One is to use the actual material with the particle system. So for instance, I have a particle material called cracked earth, which is composed of this cracked earth material and like these little rocks and stuff, which are what the particle system part of it does. So for instance, if I were to just press use right now, this would be immediately applied to this object. And then you can see the procedurally generated cracked bits, which actually look a bit crazy now that we have adjusted the texture space of the object. So you can reset the texture space of an object by pressing this little reset button here if you need to do that. You can see when we do that, it starts to look a lot more what you would expect. But anyway, so this cracked earth material consists of this cracked earth material, which is what the ground is doing, and then also these little rocks everywhere. So you can use a particle material like that, but if you want to, you can also just use the particles belonging to that material. So in the case of adding grass on top of this dirt material, that's what I would want to do. So I'm going to press Control Z, and that gives me my dirt back and returns the texture space to how I had it, and I'll hide that. And so we can add as many particle materials to a single object as we want. All we have to do is press this plus sign, which adds a material slot to the selected object there. And then we just select the material we want to use. It can be any kind of material, but let's go ahead and select this grass particle material, press use. And this just adds the particle grass from the material to the object. Otherwise, had we not added that material slot and we'd have just pressed use, like the ground would have been made out of the actual grass material, and then there would have been grass on top. So it would have been, kind of weird. But there are definitely situations like with that cracked earth material and other materials where you want the material surface with its little particles that are doing whatever. The particle material system in Alchemy is really awesome too. It can be composed of hair particles, emitter particles, particles that use objects, groups that have their own materials, even animated things, even objects with other particle systems. You can also have master particle materials that even include other materials and particle systems. So it's a really, really powerful built-in system to be able to use and add these particle materials whenever you need. Okay, let's go ahead and do a test render of this grass here. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and drag an environment into my 3D view. So if you have the drag and drop environments add-on from blendersensei.com, then you can do that as well. I'm just going to click on the skies folder, which the add-on comes with. However, if you don't own that add-on, you can set up an environment manually or just use the default gray lighting that Blender provides. So I'm going to go ahead and select this muted sky environment here and just drag it out into the 3D view. And this is going to give some lighting for my scene here, and go ahead and close that up. Okay, so let's just find a nice little angle here. So obviously a lot more grass particles are produced when you render, and it looks a lot more realistic. You can adjust any particle material belonging to an object by pressing the adjust button. Notice that when we do that, because this grass uses this particle system here, we have control of it. And of course, you can use Blender's default particle system tab if you want to get in depth in editing and adjusting the particle system. But we have these nice simple controls here. So we can control the size, make it much bigger, smaller, what have you. We've got the parent number we can adjust here, which is the root base number of how many of these particles will show up. We can also, when using a particle material, we can hide the texture space option just because it gets a little cumbersome considering that it generates a little texture space box for every little particle, which is annoying, so we can hide that. And then you have child display, which is set to 0 right now. And so if you're not familiar with particle systems, a child particle is a particle generated, such as these pieces of grass here, for every parent particle. The child display is set to 0 right now, but we could increase that if we wanted to get a closer idea of what the final render is going to look like. But most of the time, it's a good idea to keep this number low so it doesn't bog down your scene too bad. And the child render, this is how many particles of grass will actually render out when we go to render our scene, as you'll see in a second here. So I'm going to go ahead and press hide and render this out, see what this grass is looking like. Looking pretty good for a really low res 25 sample little render here. So we've got the grass working. We can kind of see the little close-up bits of the dirt since the camera is so close to the ground here, which is kind of cool. And let's press go back. Okay, what I want to do now is create kind of like a big old oak tree kind of deal. But this procedural generated dirt is like really huge in this scene because the ground is so big. So I'm going to go ahead and switch this to solid viewport shading, which helps speed things up a bit. Also, if you ever find that things are getting a bit too sluggish, you can press this button here, which will hide the preview display of the material, which can sometimes slow down your scene because whenever you're switching around materials, it's constantly re-rendering them to get a preview of it. And also, if you're a Sensei Format user and you want to disable that down here, you can just press Alt-Z to switch between whatever viewport shading you're in and solid viewport shading there. To make a tree, what we're going to do is press Shift-A and under Mesh, add a cylinder, and then I'm just going to press W a few times, which gives us smoothing and a subsurface modifier, and bring that up a bit. I'm going to press Tab to go into edit mode, and space for face selection, select this bottom face here, press E to extrude, and I'm going to press E to extrude here. And so in my scene that I have planned out in my head, I'm going to be basically focusing towards the bottom roots of this tree, so I'm not going to worry so much about branches and leaves and stuff like that because it won't really be in the scene. But to make the bottom branches here, I figured out a pretty cool little branch modeling technique. So first, let's disable this proportional editing that we were using to make the ground and select that bottom face there, press E to extrude. So we've got this kind of big trunk base here. Then what I'm going to do is select a few of these random faces at the bottom, sometimes in chunks of 3, sometimes in chunks of 2, maybe in a chunk of 1 here or there. Just kind of, random. Don't want it to be, too specific or obvious. Maybe something like that. Then I'm going to press E to extrude. And when I do that, I get this really sweet kind of basic trunks coming down here. I'm going to press Z to go into wireframe, shift scroll down for a vertex selection, Sensei Format, of course, press B to border select this area here, Z to go back to solid viewport shading, and just scale this out again like this. Press tab to go into object mode, and then I'm just going to bring this whole thing a little closer to the ground. Now it's getting much more great deku tree-ish, whatever. Let's scale that down a little bit more. And maybe bring this top bit up here, loop select that bit of faces, and added it to that top face selection by holding Alt-Shift to loop select it. And maybe bring that up a little bit, tab to go into object mode, maybe scale this whole guy down a little bit. Maybe getting a little too crazy here. Bring this over. And we can further make these roots awesome by heading over into sculpt mode, which if you're using Blender default, you can use the default methods to do that. But if you've got Sensei Format or ZeroBrush, you can just click on your sculpt button. And I'm going to press make sculptable, which converts whatever subsurface or whatever modifiers were on this into multi-resolution, which makes it easier to sculpt. And increase the size of my brush. And just kind of work with these roots a little bit, just to make them a little more rootier. I'm not going to get too worried about detail and stuff here, because most of the detail that's going to be on this tree is actually going to come from the material, because the Alchemy effect materials that use raise AE will automatically add required modifiers and assets and settings to invoke Blender's awesome new true displacement for cycles mode without having to do anything. You just press use to use the material and everything will be set up, and when it renders, you get incredible displacement combined with Blender's new adaptive subdivision feature, which is super cool. Maybe add a little more detail to this thing, because it's getting a little hard to do much detail without it being not good. So holding shift and control to smooth it out some. Anyway, it doesn't have to be too fancy, because like I said, most of the detail is going to come from the material, but you do want to have some amount of form going on. Kind of hunting for an angle that I would want to do this from, and if you can't find one, that's a good sign that you should probably sculpt a little more. Okay, I think that'll probably work. I'm going to go ahead and press this button, which takes me back to object mode, or you can just manually switch there if you want. Let's go ahead and add this bark oak raise AE material. Now, any material with the AE at the end of it denotes some type of alchemy effect material. And raise alchemy effect materials invoke Blender's awesome new ability for the Cycles render engine to use true displacement. So this will activate Blender's experimental mode. It will adjust some settings, add some modifiers that are required to use true displacement, and switch the object over to adaptive subdivision, and handle a few other things just so that the true displacement effects will just work. And of course, not only does the Alchemy base pack, the material pack that comes with Alchemy, come with these pre-made raise materials, but the same with any other special effect material. If you just include raise AE in the name of your own material, all those settings will automatically be activated to use your own true displacement materials without having to set anything up, which is awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and press use on there, and let's press Alt-Z to switch this back to material viewport shading. Once again, we can sort of get a very crude representation of what this will look like in the live 3D view, but of course we're not going to really know until we give it a test render. And I'm going to activate the viewport shading again, so you can sort of see what's going on with this true displacement material. You get a little bit of a representation of it in the preview. I mean, obviously it's not always perfect, because the bark's going to look a lot different than that when it actually renders out. But you can see that it's different from a standard material, which is not actually displacing the mesh and dynamically generating mesh for the displacement as the true displacement materials, which Raise AE uses, does. Okay, so let's come down here in the camera view and find some kind of angle that I'm happy about. I think that'll probably do it, and let's give that a test render. Alright, looks pretty sweet for a little low-res render. we probably need to adjust the texture scale on this tree here a little bit. But notice how this material has actually modified the mesh, the geometry of the tree itself. These lines over here are smooth, but it's actually using adaptive subdivision combined with Cycle's new true displacement feature to make the material real, which is really cool. But the other thing to keep in mind is that these will sort of increase your render times and work your graphics card out a little bit more if you are using GPU rendering, which you can activate here. If you're not using GPU rendering, you want to kind of go light on the Raise AE materials, unless you're cool with really long render times, in which case you can use as many as you want, but you'll have to switch to CPU so that your computer won't crash, unless you've just got the most, like a super baller graphics card which can handle it. All right, so I'm going to press adjust here, and I'm going to press Alt-Z down here in my camera area so I can at least a little bit see what's going on with this material here, and maybe increase the scale of this a little bit. Maybe, I think what's going on here is the bark is too accordioned up, too tight, like it's too squished together. So I'm going to stretch out the Z-axis a bit there, make that a bit higher, and then that way it should make a little more sense when we render it again. And I think I'll also maybe look for another angle here or something. There we go. I think I like that. Rather than doing a whole render, I'm just going to press my render preview button and see what's going on here. Okay, that's much, much better. Of course, the grass isn't showing up because this is a render preview and not an actual render, but I can see the bark looks way better, so cool. So I'll press that to stop that render preview. So like I was saying before, this adjustment menu here allows you to adjust various things going on with the material, like especially relevant things to whatever material type it is as well. So for instance, because this is a Raise AE material, Raise Alchemy Effect material, when we click this adjustments button here, we have access to this dicing scale option, which as you can see, it says bigger equals faster render. That's basically letting you know you can control the quality of these true displacement materials this way. So if we increase this, we'll get faster render times, maybe a little less taxing on our graphics card, but we're going to lose a little bit of quality. So just so you're aware of that. Similar to, in the same way, like if we click on this ground object, which has a particle material, we have these few little simple controls for the particle system. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and press hide there. And you could manually switch this to 3D view. If you have Sensei Format, just press go back. Yay! Okay, so next I want to add a fence. So I'm going to go ahead and press Alt-Z to switch this to solid viewport shading, or you can just, do that here. I'm going to press Shift-A, and mesh, add a cube to build a fence post of sorts. But what I'd like to do is hide everything for a minute that I'm not working on, which is this cube. So in Sensei Format, I can double tap tab to do that. Okay, so we're just dealing with a simple post here. So we'll scale this down, scale this up here, add a bevel modifier and smooth shading there. And I guess I didn't really need to hide everything just to do that. So I'll double tap tab to get everything back. Anyway, what we want is like a basic little fence. So I'll scale this down to be size appropriate to that tree, however big you want that tree to be in your imagination. There's a little simple fence post here. And let's add a wood material to this fence post. So down here, I'm going to click on wood, press use, and that gives the wood material to the object. In my camera area, I'm going to press Alt and tap on middle mouse button, which zooms in on the selection if you're using Sensei Format, just to get to it real quick and see what that's looking like there. Which once again, we have the nice Blender 2.78 material viewport shading for procedurally generated materials and cycles. So this gives us a little bit of a clue what this will look like when it renders. Let's check that out though. I'm going to go ahead and press my render preview button, but I know that that tree is now killing my render preview time, so I may hide that while we're working on this fence. So, okay, looks pretty woodish. I think though I'd like this post to be a bit darker. To do that, I'm going to use the Alchemy color filter. Now I could, if I wanted to, switch this to the node editor and dig around in these nodes and try to figure out which color I need to adjust or which combination of colors I need to adjust, which shouldn't be hard for me since I built this material. But it may be a different story if you're using this material and you didn't build it. It's also commonly the case that if you're using someone else's material, like this is pretty modest little node setup. The node setups with people's materials, if you've ever experimented with them, can get super crazy. And while there are these nice little menus in Blender to get access to some of the shader nodes, there's really no consistent, simple way to just change the color of something. So that's why the Alchemy color filter was built. So if I press adjust, you'll notice this add color filter button. And what this lets us do is add a color filter which builds a special node rig that plugs into all of the color information, displacement information, roughness information, things like that, and lets you globally control values so you have one consistent menu no matter what material you're using. And you don't have to go digging through nodes and try to figure out what combination of things you need to change and stuff like that. It just makes making simple changes like color and roughness and things like that a breeze. So with this selected, I'm going to press Add Color Filter. And when I do, you'll see this new menu pop up. When I pressed Add Color Filter, a node rig was generated to plug into all of the appropriate information of this material. However, the rig itself doesn't change any of the values, which is awesome because this lets you globally adjust node values across the entire material. And if you make a change to something and it turns out to be not what you wanted, so for instance, if we were to lower the saturation, which lowers the saturation across the whole material, and we decide, you know what, that wasn't actually what I wanted, we can press this, which will return all the material's values for saturation to their default, which is awesome. If we want to change the color directly, we can click here and say, for some reason, I wanted this to be green. I could click on green over here, and then I can use this blend value to blend the green into its original color. And of course, if I want to go back to how it was, I just press the reset button. And I think I will drop this displacement a bit. So I'm going to change this to about 0.25. Of course, you can see as soon as I do that you'll get this reset value pop up if you wanted to return it. To make this darker, I'm going to lower this color value. So let's set that to 0.5. That's going to make that a bit darker. And I think we'll add a new tone to kind of blend in with the overall color tone. Okay, so let's see how that's looking down here. But before I do that, I'm going to click on this tree, which we never renamed. I'll go ahead and rename that to tree, I guess. And I'm going to hide it in the render viewport as well as the 3D viewport, so this doesn't take so long to get a render preview. Okay, that's looking much more kind of subdued like I want. Let me click back on it. Maybe probably turn the displacement down too much. Let me bring that back up. 0.75. There we go. Looking a bit more grittier and good. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and press hide to hide all that. And I'm going to bring my tree back here. And I'm going to press Alt-Z to switch to solid viewport shading. So I got a little more speed. I think I'm actually going to bring this tree down a little bit into the dirt. And I might actually click on this plane here and click my sculpt button and just bring up like the dirt a little bit more around the roots, so it's like increase my brush strength there. So it's kind of like, maybe dirt's been collecting around the tree, just a little more organic looking kind of deal. All right, cool. That looks better. Switch back to object mode. One of the reasons why I love having this camera view in this area of Sensei Format, which has been kind of dubbed the director's chair, is because it's a great way to be thinking about your scene composition as you're creating things. So I really love having this little kind of way to frame stuff as I'm considering where to place things in a scene. I think I'll also turn on the visibility of the camera in the viewport so I can see what this is looking at, which it's looking at things that way. That way I know where maybe I want to bring this fence post. maybe along here somewhere for starters. And then I'm going to press Shift D, which in Sensei Format just adds an array modifier. I'm going to pop that up underneath the bevel modifier there. And it is not going the direction I want. So in Sensei Format, after you press Shift D to add an array modifier in object mode, you can change its direction by pressing Alt Shift D until it's just going in the direction you want, just like that. Then you can press Shift D some more to increase the count of the array. But I want to put some space between these posts, so I'm going to increase this offset value here, or rather decrease it because it was already in the negative value. So I'll do something like that. Just have it going out that a ways. Let's add a board to go across it because it's a fence. So I'm going to right click, which will snap my cursor to the selected object in Sensei Format, and press Shift A, and under Mesh, add another cube here, and just scale this down. And I'm just going to scale this around until it looks board like a board. And press bevel here to bevel things. And here in the bevel modifier, probably adjust this width a little bit. Let's see, maybe make this a bit thicker. That's pretty board-ish, I suppose. And what I'm going to do is also add a array modifier to it. Press Shift D and then Alt Shift D until it's going in the direction that I want it to. And do the same thing here. Let's press Tab to go into edit mode, and let's scale this out until it makes sense. Actually, let's grab it and pull it over. And I think what I'm going to need is to have this board like coming up to the halfway point of each of these posts. I think that's what will make sense. Let's press Shift D some more to add some more, which is basically the same as just increasing this count value of this array modifier. And obviously that is not perfectly. Get out of the way, tree. Press H to hide that. And I'm going to press 4 to go into right view so I can see this flat and get this figured out here. Let's see, scale this guy, bring him over. You can see how precise I do things. Super, super precise. All right, that looks a bit better. Shift D a few more times. Get this going across there. And bring that over some. Okay, that's pretty good. Let's add a wood material to this also. And actually, this is that same wood material that we used on the post. And I'm going to press Use. There we get that over there. But maybe the boards that went on these posts are a little newer, so maybe they're like lighter colored. So let's press Adjust. And since that material already had the color filter added to it, we don't have to add that again. Instead, what we're going to do is press this little plus sign in the default Blender material menu here, and this will turn this into a new material, and we'll just call this fence board. I think that's how you spell fence. That's really how bad I am at spelling. I don't, I'm that bad with it. I'm sorry. And then let's make this lighter, and actually let's reset that color value there. We'll bring that up. That's probably way too light, and make this a bit darker. And maybe lower the overall saturation. Maybe it's just a little more washed out, maybe a little more contrast. All right, let's see what that's looking like. I'm gonna go ahead and turn off the renderability of that tree so it doesn't try to do that fancy true displacement while I'm just trying to get a simple render preview. Looks pretty cool. I think we need to do some adjustment to the surface of this material. So I'm going to actually press Alt-Z here in the big 3D viewport so we can see how we want to adjust this here, the texture space stuff. So I'm going to pull that out. Is that what I want? Maybe. Let's drop the displacement some to 0.35, and that's not really affecting anything except for the top part. that's affecting things. I think that's, yeah, that's the stuff I want stretched out. There we go. I think like that would be good. Press Alt-Z to get out of the material viewport shading. Go ahead and hide that. I think I want to add some nails to this board. So what I'm going to do is, well, I'm going to hide that camera because I don't want to see it while I'm doing this. And I'm press Tab to go into edit mode, space for face selection. And I'm going to press Shift D, which in Sensei Format, that is object from selection, creates a new object from your selection. And so now I'm actually, you can see this went from being cube 0.001 to cube 0.002 because I'm now actually have a new object here. And what I'm going to do is just scale this down to make a small kind of nail. And I'm going to press E to extrude it out. And you can see that bevel modifier carried over on there. I'm going to press Tab to go into object mode, switch over to my modifiers. And I'm going to get rid of that bevel. And I'm going to increase this offset here. And actually, Tab in edit mode, press A to select all, G to grab. I'm going to bring this up where a nail would actually be. So somewhere like that. And then I'm going to increase the offset of this until it is where it needs to be for each of these. There we go, that's it. I'm going to tap W to add smoothing onto this, which just adds a subsurface modifier, and the first time and then pressing it more increases the subsurface levels in Sensei Format. And tab to go into edit mode and scale it down just a bit. Oh shoot, I should have scaled it first. Now I'm going to have to change the offset again. Oh well, no big deal. I'm going to go ahead and press D to duplicate it also. And then I'm going to press Z to go into wireframe so I can select all of it by pressing B to do a border. Select Z to go back into solid viewport shading. And press D to duplicate this, because what I'm going to want is like 2 nails on each side of the board like that. So we'll select those all, try to get that all worked out there, and then let's adjust the offset that I worked so hard on fixing a second ago. There we go. All right, cool. So now we have a nice array of nails here. And, you know, if we were going to finish this up, obviously, and we wanted to have this, you know, even though the camera is not going to see this, but if we wanted to have this all nice and good, we could apply these array modifiers and, you know, move stuff over or whatever, but no big deal. So what I'm going to do is in my material tab, I'm going to select steel and press use, which gives steel material to these nails. And if I press render preview, you can see what's going on there with that. Okay, got some basic nails there, but they're probably way too shiny. So what I'm going to do is press adjust, add another color filter, and then increase their roughness a bunch. Go ahead and press my render preview button, because I can actually get faster updates during an actual render preview than the material viewport shading, which is kind of sad, but it's still cool that we can see stuff in the regular 3D view. Maybe make this like darker and blend that in with the regular color of it. There we go. That makes a bit more sense. And turn off render preview. And let's press G to grab and just move this a little more into the fence wood. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and hide that because I don't like seeing all that texture space stuff. And turn the visibility of my tree on, both for when it renders and for in the live 3D view. And if we take a look back in the UV image editor at this first render, this was pretty cool other than like the material surface of the tree we had to adjust a little. But one thing I don't like going on is that the particle system of the grass isn't really aware of the tree. So it's kind of like in some parts it's coming up through it a little bit. I mean, you can't really tell that much. And honestly, it might even look like it just naturally grew up through grooves in the bark. But there's a way we can handle this, and that would be to actually paint on the particle material rather than just apply it to the whole object. And since you can paint with Blender render materials, cycles materials, particle materials, and Alchemy effect materials like fire, fog, and rays, then we should do that. So I'm going to press go back. And first I'm going to select this ground here. Let's go ahead and rename this plane to ground because it's the ground. Get rid of this grass material. I'm going to press this minus sign, which deletes that material slot of the object, which is the ground. And I'm going to click on the object's particle systems over here and get rid of it. Now what I want to do is paint some grass onto here. So all we need to do to paint with particles is select the particle material we want to paint with, like this grass here, and then press this paintbrush button. Now, there's two ways of painting with particles. If I wanted to paint the actual material surface of the grass with the grass, then I would just click paint right here and that's what would happen. But I actually only want to paint with the grass particles. So to do that, all we have to do is press this button and then it will just paint with the grass. So I'm going to go ahead and press that. And whenever you're painting with Alchemy, you will be automatically transferred to whatever type of paint mode you need to be in, and settings and things will be changed so you can immediately begin painting, no confusion, no frustration, and just start doing it. So I am going to paint around this tree here, and you can see as I do, the grass manifests. The distribution in Alchemy of these particles is set up in two ways. One, the particles go wherever you paint, and also however hard you paint. So for instance, if I real lightly stroke on here, it's just going to be kind of green. The height of the particles will be pretty low, but if you wail on it and make it to where it's red, then they'll grow higher. I think I want that fence over a little. So what I'm going to do is press finish painting, and whenever you're finished painting, you can just press that and it'll return you to the previous mode you were in, so there's no confusion or anything like that. I'm going to go ahead and parent all the items of this fence together so that when I just grab one part of the fence, it all moves. So I'm going to select the nails, which I'll go ahead and rename those to nails. And then shift select the boards, which I'll rename those to boards. Finally, shift select the post and press parent. And so that's the easy way to parent things in Sensei Format. If you are in Blender Default, you would want to go the object menu parent or press Control P or whatever. And while we're at naming things, I'll go ahead and rename this cube, which is the posts there, posts. So we can grab that, press G to grab. We'll move that back a bit too. There we go. I'm liking that. To get back to painting the particles, we can click on the ground, and you can either switch this to the mode we were in, which was weight paint, to paint those. But if you don't remember all that and you don't want to fool with all that, you can always just go back to painting by just pressing the paintbrush button, and it will take you where you need to be. I'm going to press X to increase the size of this brush, and I'm going to increase my strength so these go down hard, because I'm only going to want to do lightly around stuff where I don't want grass poking up through things. Alchemy uses the same convention as Zero Brush in that you can hold Shift to erase and then just draw, to draw. It especially being able to use Shift to erase your strokes in weight paint mode is way easier than constantly adjusting the strength value, which sucks. All right, that looks pretty cool. Maybe time for a test render here to see how our scene's looking. So I'm going to go ahead and press Finish Painting here. Test this out. Okay, looking pretty sweet thus far. And also, we've done no UV mapping. To me, that's really exciting to be able to get these kind of results. This is the way that I always dreamed of working. But anyway, there's some things that definitely need adjusting. So I think the texture space on this tree here, we can go ahead and adjust that. Probably needs to be made a little smaller, so we can click this button here and then drag it down, which, as you can see down there in the camera view, it's making that all a little bit smaller, which is good. And then it looks like some weird, my nails on my board, maybe having some trouble there. So I want to adjust that. And also the displacement on that board is a little thick, even though a lot of it's just grainy because it's only like 50 samples rendered with. And then there's not that much grass there where that root is. It's just kind of bare, and I don't like that. So I'm going to switch to 3D view, and let's take a look at this fence here. And I think I don't want this board to be quite so light colored. Let's press adjust here on that. And we can make this color a little darker. In addition to increasing the blend value to say maybe 0.5. Let's see if that does it. There we go. Now it's a little different. Or maybe we'll even make it a little less. Now it's a little different, but not, so wildly different, which is good. And also the displacement we saw was pretty high. So let's drop that down to 0.25, I reckon. And then I'm gonna press hide because I'm done with that stuff. But let me see what's going on here. No? I guess it was just the angle of the camera made it look like the nails weren't on the post right. Also, in reality, this fence would be built up a little bit. So I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and apply this array modifier so that we can raise this stuff up individually so it just makes more sense. So I'm going to press apply to apply the array modifier. And then I'm going to separate all of these by pressing separate. And if you're not using Sensei Format, then look it up because it's a little more drawn out than that. So let's raise some of these posts up here. And also just having a little bit of like human variation in the mix, will make it more believable. I'm going to go ahead and press Alt-Z to switch to solid viewport shading because it's going really slow with all those procedurally generated materials. Let's go ahead and do the same for these boards here. Let's press apply on the array modifier, and I'm going to press separate. So I've got these individual boards to work with here. And let's see, how would this be done? Like this? I don't know. I guess it depends on whatever, the way Randy did it. Maybe that was done at a little bit of a curve. I'm sure that's actually touching the fence. All right. Now, to make sure that these nails line up here. And the other thing that was wrong, if I remember, was we need to, I guess, paint a little more grass there. And also, I think I want to bring up the dirt like in this little crevice there. I think it would look more natural if that was up a little higher. So I'm going to select the ground and press my sculpt button and just like bring that up some. Maybe that one over there, even though it's off camera. Yeah, just something a little, cover this thing up a little more. It look a little more like it's had more of a journey. So let's press this. And now the material paint button won't let us actually click it to paint unless when we have this particle material option, paint with particles only option pressed down like we do, unless we're actually on a material. So let me click back to the grass we were on, and then this will just switch us back. And yeah, you can see here, that's the area of the image where it was like not enough grass or whatever. Also, I think I may just like lower my strength some and just shift paint over, just maybe make things a little more splotchy, like especially maybe around some of these posts. All right, press finish painting there. Okay, so I think we're looking pretty good thus far. Next, what I want to do is make the actual kind of weird alchemy, I don't know, some kind of weird thing that you find out in a field one day that shouldn't exist. So I'll press Alt-Z to switch back to solid viewport shading. And to make this, I'm just going to press Shift-A and under Mesh, add a cylinder. Then I'm going to double tap space to get to the tool operator options. That is actually the menu that's normally here in Blender default, these tools that pop up whenever you add something or use a tool or something. But in Sensei Format, we can double tap space to get to those options as soon as you add it. And I'm going to increase the vertices, which basically means sides of that cylinder, to something real high because I'm going to paint on it. Let's see, 200. That's probably way too high. Maybe 150. All right, that'll probably work. I'm going to press Tab to go into edit mode. and I'm going to press space for face selection. I'm going to delete this top face here by pressing X, because the whole face was made out of one giant ingon. That's a polygon face that it's just one huge face because it had all these little sides. But I'm going to shift scroll up for edge selection, then alt select this loop of edges and press F, which in Sensei Format is Smart Fill. It will basically make the best choices for filling things as they are possible to do. So basically, if it can perform a grid fill, it will. If it can't, it will just do a big ingon face there. But I wanted that grid fill of faces there. And what I'm going to do is press Control I to inverse the selection, press X to delete, and press A to select it all, and E to extrude. Because I wanted a cylinder, but I wanted it with all these vertices inside of it. And if you're not using Sensei Format, once again, you would have probably wanted to go to Mesh and, I don't know, Grid Fill. It's in one of these, probably. All right, I'm going to press Tab to go back into Object Mode, and then I'm going to press Bevel, which adds a bevel modifier to this thing in Smooth Shading. But the bevel modifier is not liking having all those faces and things. So I'm going to decrease the segments and adjust the width until it looks not bad, is the technical term for that. Okay. And under my material tab, I'm going to add a concrete material to this. So here's concrete here, and we're going to press use. And let's press Alt Z to see what this is looking like in the 3D viewport. Looks pretty good. Got some smooth areas, got some rough areas there, like a nice concrete pour. I'm going to go ahead and double tap tab to hide everything but this, so my scene goes a little faster. And what I'm going to do is actually paint on some water. Because yeah, in Alchemy, we have the option of particle painting as well as material painting for both Blender Render and Cycles. And what material painting means in Alchemy is painting not only the material surface, like its colors, the way it looks, but the actual properties. So translucency, whether it's transparent, its displacement values, all that are actually merged for real material painting. So what I'm going to do is select water, and I'm going to turn this option off because I just want to paint with the material and not some particle. And I'm going to press this, which will automatically set me up to begin painting. And thanks to Blender's awesome new material viewport shading in Blender 2.78, which I've mentioned several times, we can actually see what this will sort of look like here. So I'm just making some kind of random wet splotchy spots just to make this surface look more supernatural. And I'm holding Control to blur the edges of this thing so it all smooths in together a little bit better. And sometimes it's useful to view this in solid viewport shading so you can make sure everything's nice and smooth and everything. And also, even though Blender can mostly produce procedurally generated cycles materials in the 3D viewport now, sometimes it doesn't get them exactly perfect, and it might freeze up or something. And if that happens, you can just paint this in solid viewport shading. But it is nice seeing the actual reflections and seeing what this material going on here is going to look like live in the 3D view. It's pretty sweet. All right. I'm done, so I'm going to press finish painting there and double tap tab to get everything back. And so now I've got this sweet surface and I want to build some more stuff around it. Okay, so I'm going to press Alt Z to go back into solid viewport shading, tab to go into edit mode, and I'm going to press space for face selection in Sensei Format and Alt select this loop of faces out on the edge. Then I'm going to press Shift D, which in Sensei Format is the object from selection tool, which will create a new object based on the selection. So I'll press Shift D, and that makes that, which is awesome for organic modeling and offshoot stuff like this. And then I'm going to press E to extrude and S to scale this out. And S to scale, middle mouse to constrain, or I probably should have inset that, but whatever. And I'm press tab to go back into object mode. I'm going to get rid of this bevel modifier that was on it from the object that it came from, which was that weird surface, and tap W a few times to give it some smoothing. And then press tab to go into edit mode. And I'm going to Shift Alt select this inner set of loop of faces in here, and S to scale, and do the same for this outer edge here. Then I'm going to press E to extrude again to kind of flatten this outer surface of this up some, like this. And now I'm going to press 5 to go into top view, because I want to make a selection of some of these faces to do a cool thing. Double click to deselect everything, and space for face selection. I'm going to Alt-Shift select these loop of faces here, and Alt-Shift select these loop of faces down here, across from each other. Whoops, didn't mean to select that. Press Ctrl-Z, maybe zoom in so I can get the right one. And then do something like cross the center too. I think my words made sense just now, maybe. There we go. Now what I'm going to do is hold Control and scroll up to expand these selections here, which we can do. Looks like a Stargate. I'm going through the Stargate! Like this. Maybe about 4 each. Press Z to go back into solid viewport shading. And I'm going to press, well, what I was going to press was E to extrude, but actually I think I'll press Control and scroll up and get one more loop selection around each of these. And then I'm going to Alt-Shift select the ones in the center to deselect them, because that's what I want to do. Okay, now I got the selection I want, so yours should look something like this if you're following along. Wait, didn't get that one over there. Let's Alt-Shift those so those get deselected. E to extrude, and then rather than pressing S to scale, I want to press Alt-S to scale, which is actually the shrink fatten tool, because if we just did a regular scale, it would do like that, which that's cool, but it's not what I want. I want Alt-S, which does more of an inset scale sometimes when you want it to sometimes. And then it'll look like that, which is sweet. And I want to maybe raise this thing up to where these look like they're kind of feeding into the thing. And what I'm going to do is go to my Material tab and click on my categories and select Metal and scroll up here because that was scrolled down. And what do I want to make this thing? Let's see, let's go ahead and make this steel. So click on Steel and press Use. Actually, because we duplicated this object from this other object here, it carried over its materials, so we need to get rid of those. Okay, I'm going to switch this back to all and close up my reality palettes there. Got this steel material on here, and I think I'm going to click on the concrete obelisk. Is that what we should call it? Something like that. Press tab to go into edit mode. I just want to bring maybe this down to where it's like, you know, sitting on something. Let's see, should I just bring it straight down like that? I think I'm going to have this thing a little lower. But yeah, let's try that. Let's press Alt-Z to see what that concrete's looking like on there. Looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and parent this thing to the big concrete thing so that when I grab it, it will move with it. And press hide to get rid of that stuff. Press G to grab, and I think this thing's coming down just a bit, and I'm lagging real bad, so I'm going to switch to solid viewport shading. And maybe a bit higher, maybe like that. That would be good. All right, let's press tab to go into edit mode, and press G to grab middle mouse constrain, bring the rest of that down. Bring that over just a tiny bit, maybe back a bit. There we go, that's good. So as far as material painting goes, you can mix and paint with any two materials, so long as they're both from the same render engine. You can even paint with particle materials as well as Alchemy effect materials, but you can only paint with or mix two materials at a time. Unless you are just painting with the particles of a material, then you can actually have as many particle layers on an object as you want. So for instance, we've got this ground here with this grass particle material on it. We can add another particle material. So say we wanted to add some weeds around here, we could do that. All we have to do is make sure this button is pressed in, which turns on particle painting only instead of painting with the material and its particle. So I'm going to select weeds here and press paint. And of course, this sets everything up as it needs to be to begin painting. Only I forgot that once you've already painted an object with something, like with this grass, that pressing the paintbrush button will just transport you to whatever mode you need to be in to paint things. And then if you want to add another particle layer, you just select whatever you want and then press the paintbrush again. And that adds this second weeds layer, as you can see here. So now that there's actually more than one particle material layer to select from, a little menu will pop up under the library. So if you just want to paint on the grass particles, you can, or on the weeds, you can. So select it on the weeds there because we added this weed material to paint. We can start dabbing some of this here and there. And it's super concentrated right now because basically the entire allotment of that weed material is in that tiny little area. So if I were to press adjust, you can see where it says weeds. We've got 1,000 parent weeds and then only one child display. And then it's set to render at 20. But the more we start actually, dabbing these around, the more spread out that'll be. But probably just in general, we're not going to want that much anyway, even though it's going to render with a lot more. So probably just go ahead and drop this parent value down a bunch. And I'm just dabbing these around wherever. Maybe shift paint around the edges where it might actually get into the tree, which I don't want. To add a little extra detail here. And so like I said, you can actually add as many layers you want. So I think I'll go ahead and add a little clover into this mix as well. So let's select the clover material here. With the particle paint only button pressed in, all we have to do is press the paintbrush again, and this will add a third clover layer here. And I'm going to go ahead and hide that thing. And once again, it's going to be the same kind of deal. It's like super concentrated and until you start like spreading it out a bit. Or also, we can, decrease the amount of overall clovery things. And I think I'll turn down my strength some. It's not so obvious all over the place. Maybe little packs of clovers around the post edges for some reason. I think I'll switch to the weeds and add some, make sure some pop up behind here, which I'm pretty sure it will once it actually renders, but yeah, that might actually be too much. Don't want it to be actually inside of the cement popping through. All right, that's cool. We should probably go ahead and take a test render here, see what we got going on. But first I'm going to press finish painting, which pops us out of that mode and back to where we were, and press hide here. Okay, so our scene is now getting pretty complex, so you want to make sure that you save your file before rendering at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and press file and save. And you'll notice that when I did that this automatically shut the library. That is in case you forget to shut the library before you save the file, because if you save the file with the library open, it might save those materials to the actual file. Of course, they'll all be removed whenever you close the library, but still, it's not a terrible idea to manually shut it. Okay, I think we're looking pretty good here. Let's give this a test render. All right, this is starting to look pretty sick. I got a couple of problems going on here. So for one, those fence boards are still, the displacement's way too high. Now it's important to keep in mind that when you do a really low sample render like this, which was like 25 or 50 samples, I don't remember, that the grittiness of displacement is always going to get smoother the higher you make the samples. So if you plan on doing like a high sample rate, Just keep that in mind if you want things to be kind of gritty, because it'll get too smooth. But still, it's too gritty, so we need to do something about those boards. And then also, we've got weeds coming through our weird alchemy concrete magic thing, which is not good. So I think we'll press go back here, and I'll press Alt-Z to go into solid viewport shading. Got the ground selected already here, so I could open the library back up to begin painting, or I could just switch this to weight paint, and Alchemy senses if alchemy stuff has been going on, and it will, leave you these menus in weight paint mode in the material tab if you need them. First, let's press adjust, and for the weeds, probably need to bring this down to about maybe 300 instead of 500, and then shift select a few times on here so that we don't have stuff coming up through the back of that thing. Switch back to object mode here. I think I want to make this thing a bit lower, maybe taking up a little more of the scene than I want. And, just looking at the framing here in my camera area here, and maybe bring it back a little. Let's see. I like it about right there, because I'm going to have something sitting on there in a second. And then with these boards, we know we need to bring this displacement down even further. So how about just 0.1 for the displacement on there, and press hide here because I don't need that stuff anymore. So the last few touches I want to do to this is I want to make some limestone rocks up here that are maybe transforming into gold, and maybe one that messes up and doesn't transform to gold and becomes half glass or something, because alchemy has such amazing material painting abilities. I just want to show that off. So I'm going to right click here to bring my cursor. I'm going to press Shift A and under Mesh, add a cube, press G to grab, get rid of that transform widget, I don't need you, and have this stone sitting up here. And I'm going to go ahead and double tap tab to hide everything so I can just work on this. And press my sculpt button, press make sculptable and more a few times. And I'm going to tap space. Here in Sensei Format, if you have zero brush light or zero brush, you'll have this brush selection menu if you tap space, or you can just change your brush through here if you're on default Blender. And I'm going to select the polish and just use this to give some roughness to make a little stone type stone deal of stoneness. These edges are a little more extreme, increase the hardness. Yeah, that's much better. Hardness is up too much. Which, by the way, yeah, hardness slider with zero brush, it's a slider version of controlling the curve in painting, which is nice. That's why I built it, because it's nice. Okay, whoops. All right, so we've got kind of a stone here. It's like using 5 levels of multi-resolution, which I don't need, so I'm gonna, you can see it tells you the subdivision levels up there. I'm gonna drop it down. I was just basically doing that to an easy way to model it, a low poly stone. Maybe one more would be good. Press apply there, and switch back to object mode. Double tap tab to get the rest of my scene back. Maybe go ahead and rename it to stone. And let me scale it up just a little bit, not too big. Grab, drop it down. And it's not very smooth, but I'm not really worried about that because I'm going to add a raise AE material, which uses cycles true displacement and adaptive subdivision and all that cool stuff. So I just basically need its form, and then the material is going to take care of the rest of the geometry. Well, I'm going to open up my library. Under my categories, I'm going to select rock and select this limestone here. Limestone raise AE is its full name. Press use, and if I press Alt-Z, we can get a little bit of a representation. Obviously none of the cool displacement geometry stuff that's going to happen when we render, but it's still cool to see that like that. Okay, so I'm going to click on all here and dismiss my category selection, which was actually dumb. I should have used it to select metal so it would be faster to select gold. And then we're going to paint gold onto the top of this rock. And I know that the standard mythology of alchemy is lead to gold, but whatever, this is what we're doing. And I'm going to turn particle only painting mode off so I can be able to paint with this material on top of this limestone material. So press that, and we're immediately transported to be able to paint. And the material has gone gray, which means it has now become too complex for Blender to know how to represent it live in the 3D view. It can only represent it during render times. So because we can't see our paint strokes like that, let's press Alt-Z to switch to solid viewport shading so we can at least know where the gold we're painting on is going. So we want to paint, this is where gold's going to go. And if you wanted more resolution, you could, just subdivide this little rock, but I don't really need it. I just need basically a little mask to show the areas of where gold is and versus the areas where limestone is. I think that'll be smooth enough. Yeah, all right. Let's press finish painting. And we probably should render this to see how this is going. But we're now using lots of particle systems. We're using two materials that use true displacement, which can tax the system even more. So if your system starts stalling out, you may need to switch from GPU to CPU if you happen to be using GPU. But in any case, you definitely want to save before doing a render test at this point. So I'm going to close this and press File, Save, and do a render preview over here and see what's up. Zooming in on this thing a little bit. Looks pretty cool. You can see like all the limestone geometry poking about, and then the cool splatters of gold on it. Looks awesome. Although I can't tell at this point if, I think that's just because the adaptive subdivision started far away, and when it starts far away from an object, it doesn't put that much subdivision in it. But if you start closer up, you'll get a better view of what it's going to look like. And keep in mind too, when using these Raise AE materials, the true cycles true displacement materials, that the render preview is only going to be half the resolution of what the actual render will do. All right, cool. I'm going to back that up a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I want to duplicate this. So I'm going to press Alt-D to duplicate it, which duplicates it without duplicating its mesh also, which helps save resources and stuff like that. So Alt-D is good to use instead of regular duplicate when you know you're not going to make much changes to an object, just like basically its position, scale, stuff like that. You just need a copy of it to put somewhere. And finally, I'm going to make one that's like fused with glass instead of gold. So I'm going to press D to duplicate this. D to grab, move it over here, scale it a little bit. I don't know, maybe scale it vertically or something to where it looks a little weird or different or something. And I don't need all that bottom bit. Box selection, and maybe delete this bottom part of it. And just bring it here. And I'm going to get rid of the materials on this object, or at least the one that says painted there, and the gold one also, so I can paint glass onto this. So what I'm going to do is press Library and find glass, then press Paint. And actually, this object here, now that I think about it, because I duplicated it, it already had that vertex paint left on it from before, so really is not a lot I need to paint with this. I'm going to press Alt-Z to switch back to solid viewport shading, because it's a bit faster at this point. Got a lot going on here, plus in addition to recording this via software that's also using up my graphics card. All right, let's press Finish Painting, and let's give this a render test here, see what that's looking like. Awesome, that is super weird. It is super weird, the glass like fusing straight into the limestone. But it's way too big, I need to make it smaller. All of these are way too big because the displacement part is like really high. So I could either shrink them or turn down their displacement value. The lazier thing is just to shrink them. So I'm going to press pause and I'm going to shrink all of these guys down. It might look kind of cool like that also. Give that a test render there. Pretty sweet. Okay, so we're just about done here. The last thing I want to do is use an Alchemy effect material to paint some fog onto our scene. And yes, we can do that, and it's super easy. So of course I could just add fog to the fog material to one or multiple objects, but we can also paint with it instead, which gives us a lot more control. So what I'm going to do in my library is just come down to here where it says fog AE. And of course, all of these Alchemy effect materials not only set up the effects that use the material, but the materials are they're complete. Basically, they'll render and they'll look good, like especially fire, which also uses an animated texture. It will generate it live for the length of the animation that you have set up in your scene, which is awesome. So with this selected and then the ground selected here, I'm just going to press paint. This takes me to where I need to be to start painting, where I want the fog to go. And so I'm just going to paint where I want the fog to go. So we want like a light amount of fog popping up around the edge of here. And maybe some like streaming in from behind this tree. And then just some random fog in the background. Trying to keep an eye on what stuff's, actually looking like where I'm going to render it. And that may need some adjustment, but we'll find out in a minute if it does. So when you're done painting where you want fog or fire or smoke or whatever to go, you just press finish painting, and the instant you do, well, almost the instant, because I got a lot of stuff going on in this scene, the fog will begin to manifest, or the fire or whatever, in those areas where you painted it on. So it's a little, it's actually a lot, and it's kind of looking low res right now, and that's because the object I painted onto was so large. And anytime you use like a fog or a fire effect or something like that, Blender requires something called a domain box to house it all in there. So there's two ways of increasing the resolution of this fog. One, well, first let me press pause so I can stop that. One is to press the adjust button. And in the same way, we have access to various different material types in this adjust menu. For these fog, fire, and smoke effects materials, we can change the detail. And of course, increasing the detail is going to increase render times. So a better way to do that, you can just scale this domain box down to closer cover the area that you plan to use the effect. So to see the effects, now that I've changed the domain box, I can just press back or press back here to go to the beginning of the animation, press play. And now you can see that the fog is a lot more fine and like a lot more detail and stuff to it, which is pretty sweet, even without increasing the actual detail, because it's working with a smaller domain box. So it's got more room for resolution. All right, let's press pause there. I think that would look pretty good for a render. And there was actually one other thing I wanted to do that I forgot. I'm going to press Alt-Z to go into solid viewport shading. And that was, I wanted to duplicate these fence boards and these nails to where there was like 2 fence boards on these posts, because it's rare that a fence just has one board going along. It's more like a rail, less like a fence. So what I'm going to do is press, is it 1 to go into front view. And then I'm going to press Z to go into wireframe, B to do border select, and then Z to go back into solid viewport shading. And then I'm going to hold C to do my circle select brush and hold the middle mouse button down to deselect things that aren't the things I want selected, which are all that stuff and all of these posts, because I just want to duplicate the fence there. Press Z to make sure I only have the things I want selected, which seems to be this too, or what is that? Why is that one down there? What happens if I move it? Let's see, G to grab. I think it's good. I don't think it moved anything I didn't want it to. All right, cool. Instead of just doing a direct duplication, I'm going to press Alt-D, which helps conserve some resources. So I'll just press Alt-D and bring this down a little bit here. Press Z to go back into solid viewport shading. All right, I think that about wraps this up here. I think I might adjust my environment lighting too a little bit. If you have the drag and drop environments add-on, then you can do that. But I can press this to turn it back on, so here it is. I could increase the overall energy of the scene, which lights the whole scene here, this big image will, by increasing this energy value. However, if I do that too much, it's going to drown out the colors in my sky and stuff, so I don't want that. And so what I'm actually going to do is switch that back to 1, and then I'm going to use the Use Dynamic Source feature of drag and drop environments. But rather than turning up this energy too high and drowning out my sky, I'm going to press Use Dynamic Source. And what the dynamic source does is it builds a sun lamp into the scene, and then it filters the color from the direction of wherever it happens to be from that environment image into the lamp, but then allows you to, because you can control the direction of the sun lamp, you can then decide to intensify the color of light coming from a specific direction, which is exactly what I want to do. I want to be able to increase the brightness and make the light more dynamic without blowing out the background environment, but still using that environment as the main source of lighting. So this is perfect for that. And actually, the position of the sun lamp makes no difference. I'm just sort of moving it around so it's more easy for my brain to think about where I want this light. Only the rotation of a sun lamp really matters. Let's switch that off of normal back to global because Anyway, that's gonna about do it. Thanks for watching this video all the way through. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you're excited about the things and worlds you may build with Alchemy. And so yeah, check it out over here if you want to download the manual, peruse through more of the features and whatnot. I highly recommend it. More than a year of development has gone into the Alchemy material library. I really hope it helps revolutionize open source 3D modeling and animation. So thanks.